Welcome to another episode of Commercial Real Estate Uncovered. I'm Erik Sexton, and I'm grateful to have Jeff LaPore here with me for about an hour podcast. Jeff, thanks for making the time to come meet with me and answer some questions.
My pleasure, Erik. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So before I jump into your professional career, I always like to do an icebreaker. What is something that people might not know about you?
That's a good one. I think I'm pretty open book. I think I think what you see is what you get.
What about, I can throw one out there. I know you from the professional world, but I also know you from the motorcycle world. I don't know if a lot of people would know that you're quite the motorcycle, maybe borderline obsessed.
Yeah, I love motorcycles. I've had one since I was 5 years old, and you and I have ridden many times together in many great places in the U.S. And it's one of my favorite things to do.
Jeff and I, we were just talking about different types of riding, like dirt biking and track riding. And one thing that you and I were talking about, we've ridden multi-state rides to, like, there's a ride to Texas that happens annually, which that's my favorite kind of riding, which is the adventure one. But if you had to pick one of those, do you have like a go-to or?
I think it changes depending on where you're at, kind of in your life, and where you are, kind of with a lot of personal things. But adventure riding's my favorite at the moment.
Good, I love it.
All riding's great.
Totally agree. 2 tires and a motor and you're good to go. No, I've ridden, it's just fun. Even I'll take my dirt bike sometimes just to go check my mail, and it puts me in a good mood. Just opening the garage and you see your bikes is just, it's the best.
Same.
All right. Well, people who know you obviously know your reputation. You've built a lot of really cool projects in Las Vegas. I know you do stuff in other markets. So during this episode, I kind of just wanted to talk about your process of like finding deals and, managing people. And I've got a couple good kind of off the cuff topics we'll cover. So I'm trying a new little format, and it's also the first episode I'm doing actually at our office. I used to use a studio, so thanks for being the guinea pig on the we'll call it the conference room podcast studio.
It's a great setup.
So I want to start with, let's call it the art of the pitch. I know you used to be a real estate broker before you got into development, right?
Yes, that's true. Yes.
When you're working on a development, I'm assuming you pitch deals maybe for capital or try to find partners or trying to win a property. Or you probably also got a lot of people pitching you on deals. Is there something that sticks out that's like the secret sauce to either when you're pitching on a deal or somebody's trying to propose something to you?
I think it depends greatly on which side of the table you're on for the opportunity. For me and for us and for my team, we always look for just a handful of basics, like to make the first cut as you start to peel through, a deal. First thing we always look for is some form of an advantage. And that generally will either come from avoiding competition, meaning that we stay away from these giant industrial pipelines that are just about in every market that you would ever want to be in. Or we're looking for, some form of a distressed seller, a distressed piece of property, or something that gives us a big advantage. And we're generally an early mover. So I think, it just depends. You kind of go around the horn as you look at something. Those are kind of the high spots.
Got it. So you just want to, sometimes you don't even have to be the best. You just have to be first.
Well, we think that if you put it all together, it increases your chance of success dramatically. So if you have the best location, you have the best product, and you have the best timing, and timing's tough because a lot of things out of your control, but we focus on those things, and generally not only is the project, publicly successful, which most people see, hey, either the building leased or it didn't. What they don't see is how well it performed financially. And if you have the right components, it can be a game-changing financial success. Most people don't see it, but that's where we spend our time.
On the financial side of it. You mentioned some of the like big box industrial stuff that everybody likes to do. You've done some really creative stuff or developments in town. Like you did the Wholesome Lofts on Charleston. Do you still own that?
Still own it.
Still own that. That's so you
22 years later.
22 years later. Well, it's a cool project. There's really still nothing in town like that, and we've gotten some more creative stuff. But like, how'd you come across, like, that's a perfect example to go to? And if people don't know what the Wholesome Lofts is, it's the former Wholesome Bread Bakery, I guess, on Charleston and the 15 freeway here in Las Vegas, and you converted it in this modern kind of office retail setup.
Yeah, I think, first off, most of the stock of those types of buildings in this market have been demolished and something else has been built back in its place. So Rarely do you see something that, has a good location, that has good bones to it, and that has not yet been demolished. And 22 years ago, 2003, when we took that on, it was suffering from access issues and things. But, downtown was like the stepchild back then. But I always thought, and I always loved downtown and was always a believer in it. It took a long time for things to come around. Took a lot of other people making significant investments to drive the market. But look at it today. It's suddenly, that side of the railroad tracks, west, with Symphony Park has dramatically changed the face of downtown. So when I first saw it and saw that it was available, I intuitively just thought, yeah, this is really great. And there's a way here to do something. I wasn't sure what it was going to be. But when you back into the economics, we basically paid $20 a square foot for the land, and we got the building for free.
Wow. That well, it turned into a cool project. I
Yeah.
mean, I drive by it a lot. As you said, even the access, like the roads they've built in that area. Now downtown is crazy. I went and did a tour of around Symphony Park. They're doing the Cello, that condo high rise. But anyways, what they're building downtown, I've always felt that Las Vegas, we need a more pedestrian zone area, and that you were one of the, I guess, front people of that one too. So it's been fun to watch that go on. How do you make a decision that's like your gut decision versus like going off of just flat out data? Like, I don't know, maybe the Wholesome Lofts is a good example of just maybe you see something on a spreadsheet and it doesn't feel right. Do you have a way of going through the process of making a decision versus the gut feeling versus just financials?
We use all, right? Um, I would say that our basic threshold for underwriting is really simple. It's one page. And I've always thought you don't need reams of information to determine whether this is a viable opportunity, right? So, like, from our point of view, we're not the type that has to be either convinced or validated by other people to believe that this is something we should pursue. We have a saying in our office, we know it when we see it. And that's backed up by data, but it's also, gut feel. And I think one thing that you have to kind of remember in this business is that you build for tomorrow, not yesterday. So oftentimes, and I can point to 15 or 20 different projects we've done over the years, where at the moment that we undertook it, there maybe wasn't exactly a case of data backing up exactly what it would look like, but things were trending that direction. And that's kind of how this business works. I mean, you know that as well as anybody.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll, depending on who the buyer is, when we're pitching a deal, if I have something I think somebody should buy, sometimes they'll come across a group that has like an asset manager who maybe hasn't had that much experience in the brokerage world, and they're the numbers don't work, and then the principal flies in, and they've been in real estate for 30 years, and they're like, I don't care, like it'll play out this way, and it works. So
Yeah.
I'm always interested how developers underwrite that stuff because, as you know, we have a lot of big box stuff in Las Vegas. Some of it's sitting vacant because it's really far, but eventually it'll get backfilled versus a project like you've done hotels, you've done like the lofts we mentioned. Is there a product type that you like working on more so than one or the other? You've done office, industrial, and hospitality, the hotels.
I've done a little bit of residential too, just some things like coastal California, and I've done a little bit of retail. I think like our particular favored product is probably hospitality.
Okay.
We think that we can provide an advantage for us in terms of location, design, etc. But all of the projects we do, I find some form of satisfaction from. But I'd say hotel. It's complicated. It's high design. And it really is, I think, something that my team really kind of gets the juices flowing to.
Your team, how big's your team? I know you have your office here in Las Vegas. Do you have offices in other markets as well?
I do. We have an office in Phoenix.
In Phoenix. How do you manage the people that are on your team and like create a good company culture? I mean, I know like Lisa, I know Lisa Chastain, who's been with you for a long time. Like, how do you create a culture that makes people want to stay working with you?
Well, that's a good topic because I think what we have is like a really authentic culture. And the people that are on the team are people that want to be on the team. Because in 2009 or so, we basically took the company from 19 people to 4 in about probably 60 days' time, just out of necessity. And the folks that we had left, in hindsight, really were the ones that wanted to be there. And they probably led the culture even more than me coming out of the downturn and what I call like LaPour 2.0. And, good people attract good people. So it's not necessarily intentional, but it's kind of organically grown that way.
That's cool. No, well, 2009, you were not by yourself in that one. Companies, commercial real estate, especially in Las Vegas, you went down to bare minimum quickly. I was around on that too. I went from an office, really nice office, to hey, we're taking our laptops home, kind of situation. But that's okay, as Vegas has come back like a boom. So yeah, the company cultures, that's a good one though, that good people attract good people. So like when you just put out a good vibe, you naturally find a good team.
So Lisa's been with me 22 years ish. Carrie's been there 17. So, we're people that understand each other's shorthand too. And both of them, I think Lisa's the second person I ever hired. So they've all been there through thick and thin. They've all done every job in the office, and they've all seen the simplest and most complicated projects, and we've all been in it together. So that helps us, recruit other people too. So I really think that it wasn't really this big intentional, here's the framework, who's the type of person we hire, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how it worked. We've made plenty of hiring mistakes over the years.
Well, if you figure out a recipe to avoid those, please share it with the world. Problem solving. Now you're a developer in multiple states, and you're dealing with money and county commissions and permits and that kind of thing. A lot of curveballs get thrown at you, which is a nice way of putting it. Do you have a process of handling, challenges, or just let's call it problem solving? How does Jeff LaPore handle problem solving?
Probably where it starts is the fact that we don't expect anything to be easy, right? We also, I think, have taken on a culture over the years where, we feel like it's our job to solve these complicated issues. It started out being the only way that I could compete as a two-person operation when we started. We couldn't write the biggest check. We couldn't close the fastest with opportunities. So we had to kind of make our own way. And what we found out doing that, between reclaiming landfills and getting deed restrictions for height lifted, California Coastal Commission, there's probably not a scenario we haven't seen over the last 25 years. But it started out as a necessity, and then we got really good at it, and now it's kind of our competitive advantage. So I think we never expect anything to be easy. Take the big picture, long view on things. You know, don't get hung up on irrelevant things that don't matter, and just keep your eye on the ball. And we're good collaborators too, and that matters. And I think when you see cities and capital partners and different governing agencies or municipalities, they want to work with people that want to work with them.
That's a good way of putting it. You say we a lot with your team, so I'm assuming you go through a process. When you say we, you're referring to your team,
I am.
bouncing a lot of. I mean, you have like a war room. Well, let's not call it that. Problem solving room. So you are bouncing a lot of ideas off of each other. Is that
Always.
part of the process?
Always.
So I'm always interested to see a problem solve that. That's interesting how you're saying that with the we versus I kind of thing. Another thing that I want to stick to this one. Have you ever had like a deal, maybe an example of something that happened to you while you were doing a development, then you're like, I can't even make this up. This is so insane that this is happening at this moment.
So I'll give you one tip of the, right off the tip of my tongue here, and this is fresh, and this happened 18 years ago. So we were under contract to buy an oceanfront lot in Laguna Beach.
Location, location, location.
Yes. Not only was it an oceanfront lot, it was on a corner next to the steps, so it had a view corridor that was unbelievable. It was a few blocks from town, and everyone, or a lot of people, probably realize how difficult Laguna Beach is. And if you think it's difficult, take it times 3 or 4. That's how tough it is. So, and this was 20 whatever years ago. So I was buying it from a doctor that was probably in his early 70s. He'd owned it for 40 plus years. Multi-tenant, multi-family, 2 different structures, one built 1920, one built 1964. So a mishmash of just different eras, different codes, just wasn't anything that was pleasant, which actually ended up helping me in the end. So what I didn't know in the beginning when we went under contract is that his daughter was living in one of the units. So as we got into the unit inspections, which we didn't really care about because we were going to demo the building anyway, his daughter wouldn't let us in to see the unit because she didn't want him to sell the building. That was the beginning. Then it went to opposing our plan at the podium at City Council. And then it went to sabotaging. See, there you have story poles that they put up with ribbons to show what the new structure will look like.
Yeah.
It's a city requirement. There's a certain grace period that it has to be put up ahead of a hearing. She would tear it down and then call the city and then would be disqualified from making our hearing date. And that went on until I had them all put in concrete.
That's crazy.
Yeah. That's probably one of the tops.
I know exactly what you're talking about because they do the same thing in Newport Beach.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's a house going up, yeah, they're just, if you're listening to this, it's just literally a pole with those orange like tape that they put to show how tall it is. I can imagine that's about as petty as it comes. That's pretty funny.
I could give you a current version that's now in the rearview mirror, but we were working on a project, part of a big master plan. The seller obviously needed to cooperate during due diligence in order to have us clear all the hurdles for what we were going to do there. They withheld all the due diligence until the end of the due diligence period, and then when we couldn't approve it, we had to cancel, and they went and sold it for a bigger number to somebody else.
I mean, is that a lawsuit then afterwards, or are you just kind of like, well, maybe you can't comment on that quite yet?
I can't comment on it, but I think we found a solution for it, but I don't think I'd seen more sort of behavior like that, like around 21 or 22 when the market got really hot is when I saw more of that than I'd ever seen in the years leading up to it.
That's, you know what, with that kind of behavior though, I find this to happen. What goes around comes around. And when you behave that way, I think people obviously start to distrust you. And also like just karma. I really am a big believer in that. If you're doing that to somebody, it's going to come back twice or 3 times as bad.
Yeah, and maybe
That's my
hopefully.
That's my opinion on that kind of stuff. Staying up to date on things. You as we mentioned, you are developing in multiple states. Do you have any kind of podcasts or publications you use to stay up to date on what's going on, either with the economy or just building permits, just anything? Like what's Jeff LaPore's routine of staying up to date on what's going on in the development world?
I get information from everywhere. I love information. I'm every single morning I'm up early and I'm getting it from everywhere. I get it from the normal sources, CNBC, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, all that stuff. I get it from brokerage houses, all their reports and whatnot. I look at CoStar. I probably look at 50 different sort of measuring sticks from, overall economy to local down to site by site. So it comes from a lot of places.
I was interested to see how people stay up to date on that because there's just so much information now. I mean, with social media, news, all that. Are you on any social media platforms?
No.
I tried to look up your LinkedIn. I was like, wait a minute, your company has LinkedIn, but Jeff doesn't have a LinkedIn profile.
I don't have a LinkedIn. The people in my office have LinkedIn. I never even actually thought about ever having LinkedIn, to be honest, until just this moment.
That's funny. Well, if you're at this point, if you don't have LinkedIn, I think you'll be okay not having it.
Yeah.
I want to talk about networking and building relationships. This kind of goes into, you've had a long career. You've built a lot of relationships with brokers and contractors. Maybe some advice for people newer into the industry. But first of all, are you involved in any professional organizations that maybe help with networking? Maybe it's trade specific or something like YPO or EO or...
No, I mean, I've been in NAOP for on and off for 25 years. I've been on the board 3-4 times. I've been a member for a long time, ULI too. I most of the networking that I do comes from transaction history with people. And one deal leads to another deal leads to another deal. So we have a big group of brokers that we work with they know when they call us that, we have a deal if we say we have a deal. And brokers, not only that brokers, but architects, engineers, deals come from the weirdest places, contractors, banks, lenders, investors, come from all over.
You said something that I think everybody needs to hear is deals bring deals,
Mm.
because you you want to work with somebody who's been there and done that and is busy. It's like, what's that expression? If you want to get something done, give it to a busy person.
Yeah.
Um, what about like tips for effective networking? The reason I ask this is maybe somebody who's new into the business and they don't have the track record you have and they're newer. Like, could you give some benefits of maybe being part of some of those to help build your network?
I think it's an excellent way to build your network is to get on a panel. I think even the better way to build your network is to get with people that you find something interesting about and ask them questions. Because I ask questions still all day, every day. I take meeting notes. I still do exactly what I did 25 years ago. And it's an important thing because information is so relevant to what we do and how you interpret that information. So I think you should ask. There's no stupid questions. You should drill deep into the things that you're interested in. And you'll find, I mean, I answer questions for people all the time. It's, I'm busy, so sometimes I don't get back to people as quickly as possible, but the people on my team are free to answer questions especially for new people. It's important for their business.
That's a really, really good point as far as, like you said, answering questions. Do you find that sometimes people are nervous to come up and talk to you? And I found this. I started really doing social media aggressively in like the last year. And when I first got into this business, even when I was new into the business, I was like, oh, that guy built that. Like, I can't go say hi to him or something like that. And now I'm like, if you're new, no matter who it is, go say hi to them and see if they've got time to talk for 5 minutes, maybe after you're a panel or that kind of thing. So, I guess my point is this is cool that you say this. Is even if you're new, go up to experienced people and try to have a conversation with them.
You absolutely should. I can't think of one reason on the planet why anybody would be intimidated by anybody. There's just no reason for it. And I think if you're interested and if they're rude or whatever, don't take it personally, to move on. Ask the next person.
You answered my question here. I was going to ask you if you had any tips for new people in the business for networking, and you just gave me the one: is don't be intimidated by anybody. Go ahead and ask them a question.
You should absolutely.
I love it. What about defining success? You've been in this business for a long time. You've seen cycles up and down. I'm sure you personally have been hit by some ups and downs. Did you ever have like an aha moment where you're like, holy smokes, like I actually, like I made it, or like maybe you bought something where you're like, wow, this was a pipe dream and now it's like a real thing. Did you ever have a moment where you were just like, wow, like all my work paid off to a point?
Of course. I mean, when you come from, a small kind of operation and you find some success over time, there's always going to be something that you probably had in your mind. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's a watch, whatever it is, when you're younger. And I think that over time, as you get older, as you've been through the cycles, as you've seen and been part of things maybe you wished you hadn't seen or been part of in the business, I think what becomes more like valuable to me is time and freedom. That's really what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in material belongings. When you're young, you think that that might be, a reason to have happiness or whatever. That's not the case. I mean, yeah, sure, money makes life easier sometimes, but if you're not careful, it makes it harder too.
That time and freedom, I love that. Just being able to go on like, I don't know, adventures, like to take time to, maybe you don't want to go in the office during a day, or you want to go on a trip that might conflict with something work-wise. That I like that time and freedom.
Another important thing, Eric, is like for me is freedom of thought. I just want to be free to think about what I want to think about. You know what I mean? It's important, and it's as you get older, it becomes more important. At least in my case.
When you say freedom of thought, do you mean to like be in a work environment where you don't have to be worried about, I don't know, maybe a colleague's drama, or maybe
No,
like what, do
maybe
you have an example of that?
maybe bigger picture things like if we want to kick around crazy ideas, nobody's going to tell us we can't do it.
Yeah.
The kind of operation that we have, that's what we do. We talk about crazy ideas, and then something comes out of it, and we do something.
Got it. Okay. So
That's
that
the
comes,
fun part.
it is the fun part. And that
Yeah.
comes back to that culture you build. Well, talking about crazy ideas, is there a deal that you successfully built where maybe when you started, you're like, this is nuts and I don't see how this is going to work out, and it did?
Well, I think one of the interesting parts is like if I get started on something, I never think it's not going to work out. Like I get all the doubt out of the way beforehand usually. Now, granted, you're going to have some difficulty along the way, but I read this quote that I think is just so great, and it's something like this. It says, "If you're nervous, don't do it, but if you do it, don't be nervous.
So if you're nervous, don't do it. Say that again.
If you're nervous, don't do it, but if you do it, don't be nervous."
I love it. So once you get started, just go for it. Don't get too worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of doubt over the years, trust me. It's natural, I think, but I don't really have that anymore, and I don't really worry about that stuff anymore.
I do it all the time. I'll get in my own head about what could happen if this doesn't go right, or I don't know, like hiring your first person, like the first full-time person I ever hired. I was so nervous. I'm like, I can't afford this. And one of the
Yeah.
I have a
We've all been there.
yeah. Oh, yeah, one of the business mentors I was working with, he goes, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out and they'll end up where they're supposed to be. Just try it and see what happens. And then they said, what is it? You can't afford to do it. You can't afford not to do it
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Yeah.
I like that about the nervous thing. Do you do any investing outside of real estate?
Not really.
Not really.
No. I've had a lot of people, pitch me on things, and sure, I've lost a fair amount of money investing in things outside of real estate, uh, but not really anymore. Unless it would have to be really compelling or something that I knew something about.
I don't know if you know Dave Ramsey,
Sure.
the radio show host. He had an
Yeah.
episode on the other day where this guy calls in and he's saying he was lecturing his grandfather, was his grandfather-in-law on investing, and the guy only did real estate, and it turns out that his grandfather was worth like $200 million.
Yeah.
And Dave Ramsey's like, well, he does that fine, so maybe you shouldn't be lecturing somebody who's worth $200 million. Do you have a method of like handling a failure or setback? I know we all celebrate our wins, but we all work on deals, and sometimes they don't go the way we want them to, or we put a ton of work into it, and it just doesn't happen.
Do I have a pity party? Yeah, I sure you go through frustrations, you get unhappy about things. Um, and when we were in the great recession, it was particularly difficult. And I think if that wouldn't have been so hard, I probably would be tougher today on failure. But when we fail at something, and I'm not talking about a project that's failing, I'm talking about a decision that failed or a process that failed or something that we did wrong. Generally, we try to learn from it
Mm-hmm.
because it's the most important thing to learn and not repeat it again. I actually think failure is a good thing, and I think I've learned a lot more from failure than from success. Because sometimes when you're successful, you're not sure why. You don't know why.
Yeah,
You
I
think
totally understand.
but you might not know. From failure, it's a bitter pill to swallow. But I tell my kids the same thing. We're not afraid to fail. The real crime, I think, is not learning from your mistakes. That's really like the hard part. Like if you keep repeating the same thing and you keep failing.
That is a very good point, which is if you keep making the same mistake, like when I don't know, I'll give an example. Like when I go on a listing pitch and I'm trying to get someone selling a building, and I'm sure I'm up against some other teams, and I don't get it. Like they list it with somebody else. I see a different company has it listed. I always like to go back and ask the question, like, what could have I done better? And I'll even call that client and be like, hey, I see you gave it to this broker. Like, is there something I could have done differently, or was there something they said that really made them the winning factor? And those responses sometimes are really surprising. It's something I would never think of. So do you have a process that you do that when something doesn't go your way, where you kind of go back and audit it and say, maybe if this situation happens again, I could handle it differently?
Yeah, I do. I think it's the natural thing to do. Because certainly, again, our focus is not on repeating mistakes, right? And I think, they get fewer and fewer and fewer the longer you're at this, but nothing's perfect.
Yeah, that's true. We'll talk about, handling setbacks. I have a question for you about communication and responsiveness. I know you've got a good team, and probably you've got people that certain questions you'll direct to somebody on your team, but how do you stay in contact with everybody the way you're working on? Like, are you a text or email? We'd already covered social media, but like, what's like the best way for you to communicate? I know everybody has all the they like to text message or call, so I'm always curious, like somebody like you, what's the best way to communicate with somebody like you?
It depends. It depends on what it is. It depends on who the other person is, and it depends on the urgency of it. I'll text. Like my team, we can text each other super short texts, and we know exactly what we mean,
Okay.
and there's no need to add a bunch of dialogue around it. And I think if you need to, oftentimes, and I tell people, pick up the phone when it's critical. Pick up the phone. And even young people don't get that. They wanna just, "Hey, what happened here?" I sent him an email, I never heard back. That that's a part that really gets under my skin when I hear that for a response.
Yeah, well, because I think everybody's reading their email all the time, and as you've had your email address longer in a career, it's on a lot of lists, and it gets buried in. I mean, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll have 100 emails, and 99% of them are garbage.
Right.
Yeah, you hit that perfectly. If it's really urgent and you need to have a conversation with somebody, dial them 2 or 3 times in a day until they answer the phone.
Yeah.
Um, that's funny. I get really annoyed about that too. They're like, "Oh, I sent you an email." I'm like, "Well, clearly I didn't see it because I didn't respond. So just pick up the phone and call me."
Well, there's no rule that says when you call somebody, you have to wait for them to call you back. You just keep calling if it's that important.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah, that I'll if you're in sales and you think that one call, uh, yeah, one call is gonna get it done, you're
Yeah.
pretty mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go through times, and it's nothing personal. People are busy. They're running their companies, doing what they do, or maybe they just don't want to call you back because they're on vacation mode. Like it just happens.
And don't think that, like, you're the only call that they got, and they're just thinking about you, and they're thinking about how they're not gonna call you back. That's generally not the case. It falls through the cracks, sometimes need a reminder, sometimes something happens, whatever.
Yeah, early on in my career, I took that really personal. I when I was new, I'd call people like I thought they were like they liked me or something, and then I wouldn't get a call back, and then I'd call them again. They're like, "Oh, I've been meaning to call you for like 2 weeks. Thanks for calling again." So
Yeah.
people who run businesses get that. So don't take those things personal. Like just chase people down if you need to. So that's a good segue. What about evolving development trends? I always use the example with this question, like skylights were a big thing, I don't know, kind of 6, 7 years ago, and now new buildings don't have skylights. Do you see any like evolving trends, maybe with like cutting edge materials or way buildings are getting built that you're excited about having on the horizon?
Well, I think that construction in particular has been slow to adapt for whatever reason to technology. So, buildings and give or take some energy efficiency, buildings from tilt up from 1970 till now is they're nicer and they're more complicated, but it's the same. I think that it's slow to evolve, but you have seen the prefabs. You have seen multifamily and hotel go to these prefabs. They haven't worked out the bugs to exactly how that can be super efficient yet. They're working. I mean, they have robots trying to do construction now too. They haven't cracked that code yet. But I think what you're talking about is maybe more of a combination of taste and probably function. And I think people realize these leaky skylights and whatnot are an issue. And there's markets that never had skylights, so are they life or death? No, but you can put the clear stories in and get similar effects. I think, you've seen it with clear height. You've seen it with slab thickness. You've seen some subtle changes, but I think the latest sort of iteration of the warehouse is the multi-story warehouse, which, back in the 1900s, there were a lot of those. We got away from that. Now some of the cities are going back to that. Office space, primarily is natural light and ceiling heights. That's been the evolver. But in terms of a new material, I'm not seeing anything on the horizon that's a significant difference over what's out there.
What about taste? That's a great point as far as like when you're doing developments. I know, people are a lot more prone now. They want to have like a cool place to go work. So they want, I don't know, let's call it a shaded outside eating area or something. I mean, maybe as millennials are coming, well, I'm a millennial, but as people are coming into the workforce, maybe just not the biggest surface area coverage of a building. They want like cool things at their office. Are there any specific things that you've done or you've seen that maybe will, when you're done with the project, will help you win a tenant versus somebody else because you had some amenity, like electric scooter chargers? I mean,
I think, like, you can go back to office. You can go back to office probably for 20 years, and you've seen the same recycling of things, and they go in phases. When the market gets kind of soft, these older buildings will add a common lounge. They'll add a fitness center. They'll add, some form of common meeting space. And then when the market gets hot, all that gets torn out and it gets leased space again, right? So this whole sort of up and down trend of office amenities has been going on forever. And I think that a lot of it is done because of they want to not have to say my competitor has it and I don't. Because a lot of that stuff doesn't get used, the way that maybe the landlord's envisioning it, especially these fitness centers. I mean, they just don't get used in office buildings here. Now, maybe in Manhattan they do, or some of these other maybe urban cores they do, because it's a different work cycle. But I think here it's natural light, it's ceiling heights, and it's ease of ingress, egress, and parking. So the taller the building, the longer the elevator ride. We don't really have that here. It's easy in, easy out, and we need lots of daylight, and hopefully we can get a view.
The be light in the view. That's for me personally. Like where I office, that's important.
Same for me.
My office, I'm in the corner. I've got 2 sets of windows, and I've got a nice view, and that means a lot to me because I'm in my office a lot.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that Howard Hughes here in Las Vegas, the Howard Hughes Center off of like the Strip. That used to be the spot in Las Vegas, and I hated going down there because parking was a pain in the butt. You'd have to park your car, take the elevator, pick up keys, and that's like where everybody was at. All the brokerages were there, financial service, and
Yeah.
now everybody's moved out to you finished it, but you have a building off like Buffalo and the 215
Yeah,
freeway.
narrative, yep.
Yeah, the narrative. You've got some big name tenants in there. Like, what was the determining factor for those guys to move into that building? Is it kind of the things that you described as far as location and
Well, this is an example of kind of what we talked about in the beginning with where you try to get all the factors to line up. So, number one, we had a great location. Number two, we addressed from the tenant standpoint everything that's desirable in a building today. And we learned that from a building that I delivered in Phoenix in 2018 at 28th Street and Camelback. We know that natural light and ceiling heights were the 2 biggest calling cards there. Now, that had 2 levels of underground parking. This has 2 levels of above grade parking and a garage behind it. So we had a great location. We had a relevant design in terms of floor plate size, but also natural light finishes. We had freeway visibility. But most importantly, we caught a wave of pent-up demand. So no matter how nice your building is, if the demand is weak, the demand is weak. You're not going to be able to spark 100,000 square feet worth of absorption just because you have a nice building in a soft market. We hit all of those things exactly right.
sometimes you just need to be lucky. Wait,
No doubt,
and
luck
Mark,
matters.
I referenced luck one time. This was oh my God, it's probably 2006. I did one of the commercial laundry facilities in town, and I was brand new in this business. And the guy literally was like, "I'm working with you because you answered your phone on Saturday." I just happened to answer. I was just lucky, and I normally would have been off hiking or something. And
Yeah.
I did a deal that was pretty much my college tuition for the next couple of years.
Yes.
So we are freshly out of a pretty contentious political race. It's 2025. We've got our new administration, and we don't need to get into that. But are there any things like positive indicators that you've seen now that we've got that whole cycle behind us? Because one of the things as a broker that I kept getting comments on when I was like, "Hey, are you interested in this building?" People would be like, "I want to wait till the election's over." Are you seeing anything positive happening right now with the new administration? Some decisions they're making that have been good, or maybe some positive feedback as far as what you think is going to happen with the economy?
So I think every year, no matter whether it's a contentious or not a contentious, or every cycle, whether it's contentious or not, people are programmed to just say in the third quarter or the fourth quarter of the year, we have everything's on hold. I think if I would be interested in somebody would go back and do a graph and go back 20 years and just see every 4 years when there's an election, it's probably a similar pattern is my guess. This one in particular, I know And maybe it's because of the media, maybe it's because of the differences between the parties or whatever it is, seem to be particularly, fired up. I think now that we rolled into January, what we have seen is that there's optimism in the business community. There's a bump in inquiries and activities and discussions. That hasn't translated to any deals yet that I'm aware of that wouldn't have made otherwise, but certainly there's talk.
Well, let's stick on the course of the economy. Do you, I mean, how do you have any predictions of 2025, 2026? I know we're coming off this like incredibly hot cycle feeding frenzy the last couple of years. Kind of after COVID, everything I have that I put up for lease or for sale sign on, as long as it was priced reasonably, moved pretty quickly.
It depends. When you ask a developer that question, I think it depends on where they are in their project cycle. Like are you out for financing? Have you been sitting on a building for 2 years? Um, do you have a problematic refi or you have a clean sheet of paper? I think for us, we just stick to the knitting. We look for a gap in the market and then we try to fill it. We're not herd mentality. Everybody's slapping up 500, 600 million square foot buildings. That's not what we do. And we don't do that when things are great and we don't do that when things are bad. We just always, no matter what the market's doing, try to look for where there's a need for space. And now the hard part is that these things have the gestation period, a lot longer than an elephant. So you can't necessarily predict where you're going to be. You just have to stick to the fact that there's a niche here and have faith that when you are ready for it, it'll still be there.
So if you're a newer developer, you tell them maybe keep quiet of all the outside noise and maybe focus on your kind of bubble as far as like what's happening.
Yeah, find an opportunity because listen, there's plenty of funds and developers that have done a wonderful job capitalizing on this last big run up, and it's the biggest run up I've ever seen. But when you look at the cycles, every new cycle surpasses the peak of the last one. That's just the nature of the United States. And you have the dips in between, but you need to understand your product and not just say, I'm going to do this because that guy must be smart and he did it. That happens in this business too.
Yeah, kind of the parroting off of the person ahead of you.
Yeah.
So I put a post this morning on that I was going to have you on the podcast, and I said I wanted people to comment on, a question a question they would like me to ask you or a topic, and this was one of them that we haven't covered, and we're getting on the tail end of this podcast. What have you done to attract new equity capital as a developer? Or maybe that question isn't relevant to you on how you raise money.
Of course it's relevant. I just go back to if you have a compelling opportunity and it meets the criteria of these investors, no matter if they're high net worth, which we use, if they're a fund, we use that too, or it's an institutional, and we have used that in the past. If your deal meets the needs of what they're looking for, and it's a compelling opportunity, you're going to raise capital. And we raise it sometimes through an intermediary, sometimes through a relationship, and sometimes through just past bucket of capital that we use.
So it's almost don't overthink it. Find the deal, and you'll find the money after that. If there's a story behind the deal, like you'll find the money.
I think that's definitely true. And I even there's a lot of guys that worked for big companies split off during 21 and 22 and took some capital with them in industrial in particular, and I'm friendly with a handful of them. And I think they wanted to have the money first before the deal. I've never done it that way. I've always found the deal first and then the capital.
It's personal preference. It's fun. It's kind of the same thing. Agents that are either in our office or on our team, they're always like, well, who's going to buy this? I'm like, don't worry about that. If you find a good deal, we'll find somebody to buy it. Like, people like deals.
Yeah.
That's always what it comes down to. It's funny, as an agent, it took me a while to learn when I was early on too. I'd go meet people in a social setting and I'd be like, why don't these people hire me? They like me. And I was like, later down the road, No, they're hiring people who get things done and find deals. Like that's the reason they're getting hired. They might not even like that broker, but they're bringing them deals and they get the job done. So like that whole element is interesting. Find the deal and you'll find the money. Um, so we're gonna hit kind of the closing thoughts here. So it is again, it's the beginning of 2025. We've got springtime coming in the summer. What are you most excited for in 2025? Two-part question. One, personally, do you have some sort of fun adventure on the horizon? And two, professionally.
Well, I like to ride motorcycles, obviously. I like to ski with my kids. I'm going to do as much of that as possible this year. On the professional side, we're going to break ground on a dual brand hotel in Phoenix in June. 240 rooms, AC by Marriott Element. Probably the nicest hotel we've done so far. And it's at a time when there's such big demand in Phoenix by these big corporate users that we're very excited about bringing this online. So that's probably our biggest thing for 25. We also have another project in Denver. We were under construction there with about 400,000 feet in two different projects. Both will finish up end of first quarter. We're getting good traffic on both. Both those projects are in really constrained markets. One of them was a 3-year entitlement. So it's a 2.5% vacant market. There's no new product in the pipeline.
Wow.
Great location. Just was a really tough entitlement, which helped insulate us from these big pipelines. But we have another deal that's equally tough, if not tougher. We took it over from a developer that had it for 5 years. We've had it for 3 years, and we think there's 2 more years left. 68 acres, about 800,000 feet it'll hold in a sub 2% vacant market in Denver. So that's something that we're looking forward to at the end of the year. And there's another deal that we have in downtown Phoenix. We're buying a 19-story, 340,000 square foot office building that's next to a hotel that we built in 2017 and sold. We're going to convert this to a full-serve hotel, 340 rooms. So we got a big 25 like teed up, but it's all been in the works for a long time.
Got a big pipeline coming down the
Yeah.
road. All right, final question for you. If there is there a book or a podcast or something that you've listened to that you recommend to people fairly frequently? Maybe a sales book or just a life-changing book, or I always
I have a
like to
lot.
ask that. I'd love to hear one or two
I'm a
of them.
big reader. So who am I recommending it to?
Let's say you're brand new into commercial real estate, and you're trying to find your way.
Okay.
Let's say a sales book.
Okay, so I wouldn't recommend a sales book.
Oh,
for-
perfect.
I would
Read
get
the
a
sales
book called Mastery by Robert Greene. He's my favorite author. And that book right there, I didn't read it until I was older,
Okay,
but it's the best advice that I would give someone. You don't have to
I'm
be in
writing
real
it
estate.
down right now.
You don't have to be in real estate for it. You could be in any career. But the earlier you could read that book in your career, I think it would be beneficial.
Mastery by Robert Greene
Yeah.
is the book you would recommend to read. Okay.
I would.
Is there a particular reason that you would suggest that one?
It is very relevant for how I got to where I got to, except I didn't have the book.
Would have the book changed your trajectory had you read it early on in your career?
I don't know.
Or did you?
The book is really relevant, and I followed most of it, but I didn't follow the book because it wasn't out.
I'm gonna read it probably this weekend.
Yeah.
They what's always interesting when you get that kind of again a book or somebody tells you something. I was referencing the downturn. I wasn't making any money, and one coffee. I went to coffee with one guy who told me I'm looking at this cycle totally wrong and helped me carve out a different business plan. It was about 15 minutes, but it totally changed the trajectory of my career. So like sometimes you're not ready to hear that information until you're ready to absorb it. So Mastery by Robert Greene is the book that you would recommend. Okay.
So 30 years ago, a guy gave me Think and Grow Rich, and I thought, what is this? Some kind of a bogus like get rich quick book? So it's an excellent book. It's an old book. And I wouldn't exactly title it that way to market it today, but that's an excellent book too.
Say that second book again?
Think and Grow Rich.
I always write these down
Yeah.
because otherwise I forget about them. Think
Yeah.
and Grow Rich. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to meet me and do this podcast on a holiday. Obviously, carving you away from your busy schedule is always a tough thing. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to having another conversation with you down the road.
Let's find a deal to work on.
Love it. Find a deal. See, always take an opportunity to ask for a deal.
Yeah.
Podcast or not.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff.
You got it. Thank you.